Prior to working on the high pressure fuel pump or any of the fuel system, what I'm going to do is go and pull fuse B5 on the left hand side, that's for the fuel pump. Go and start the car, let it stop after a few seconds, and then go and disconnect the battery, and then come and start to work on things. Obviously there's going to be fuel, they're going to leak out of pipes, etc. when you disconnect things, even though you've removed the fuel pressure. So standard working with fuel considerations apply, no naked flames, don't have a bonfire, silly things like that. This is an overview of the high pressure fuel pump removal and installation. The high pressure fuel pump lives up inside here. It's driven from the exhaust camshaft. So it just plugs straight into that. To get access to it and remove it, you need to remove a bunch of stuff and these coolant pipes and the bellows and stuff in here. So it's a little bit of effort to get everything out of the way. The workshop manual talks about lowering the engine about 25 millimeters to give you more access. And I didn't do that. However, next time, honestly, I reckon I would, because up in here, there is just so little room to move to try and get access, and especially to torque things correctly. I think it'd be a little bit easier to lower the engine. Lowering the engine's relatively simple. You'll obviously need a transmission jack. They say to support over the base of the oil pan over a wide area, so there's no localized loading. You just have a big piece of timber with a piece of foam or something like that, that'd be easy. And there are 5 bolts that need to be removed. There's 2 off this here, and there's 3 for the mount itself. There's 2 there, and there's 1 in the middle, and then the thing can clearly be lowered. These pipes are flexible, so you can lower a little bit without any problems at all. These bolts aren't torqued to yield. They take 65 Newton meters, all those 5. So it would actually be a fairly simple process. You'll need to remove the underfloor paneling. You've got the hard coolant pipe here. This is the return from the heater core from the front of the engine. That goes down the center of the tunnel. And this pipe here, which does a funny loop here, you can't see it, but there's a bellows up here and a valve that opens or closes that. You need to either completely remove that, which is why the workshop manual calls to drop the coolant. You don't need to do that, and I'll show you how to do that where you lose very little coolant. It's pretty simple. We're just going to disconnect here, plug that up, and remove this clip and remove everything from up here, and we just rotate that around. It'll just hang down here and keep out of the way, and we'll disconnect the valve up here and close it before we do that. So basically no coolant leaks out, and then we can just plug the end of it, and it's pretty simple to keep that out of the way. So you definitely don't need to drop the coolant. There's a bunch of electrical connectors. There's one on the high pressure fuel pump itself there. I removed this cover here on the thermostat, which gives you a little bit more room to move, which is good. You can the plug, you can disconnect that just to keep that out of the way. And the solenoid for the bellows, which lives up here, and I'll show you that later on. You'll need to disconnect that as well. You've got the earthing lead here. It's just got 2 connection points. They take 10 Newton meters. They're E12 torques. You just remove that and get that out of the way completely. And then once we have removed this coolant pipe out of the way, one thing I will talk about though, there's a clip here which I'm going to disconnect, and also this pipe here just gets in the way the whole time. It's a real pain. So what I did is up in the tunnel, I disconnected the 2 clips here so I could actually move this back and forth about that far and in and out. It just made it a little bit easier rather than just disconnect that clip, because this really gets in the way when you're starting to try and torque the connections to where the fuel actually connects. And then you've got a cover around it, and that's the thing that's probably hardest to get off, because the connection's up the top. You get about that much room between the end of it and the wall up here, and all you need to do is lower it by about that far, and suddenly you would get really good access to it, which is why the workshop manual talks about that. But I'll show you how to do it without needing to do that, and then you get access to the pump underneath there. To release this clip here, just so we can move the coolant pipe around a little bit more easily, the clip itself, hopefully you'll be able to see this, but you push it up, then get your screwdriver in there and push it sideways, and then that will release it out like that. And so it's got that little clip in there that's going to fit up in there, and then you just push it up, home. The hard coolant pipe that is the return from the heater core that goes back to that fitting at the back that we want to get out of the way. I want a bit more movement in the hard pipe here. It's just going to make life a little bit easier, and there's a couple of clips in the tunnel here which, when I remove the underbody the protection away, I can get access to these. There's the clip there, there's two of those. There's one at the front here and one behind me here closer to the engine. And as you can see, there's just a simple clip at the side here. You get a screwdriver around that and then just unclip that off, and that thing will now have a lot more movement at the back, which will help us out. So the big coolant pipe and valve that controls the return from the heater core, we need to get out of the way. The workshop manual talks about draining the coolant and then just pulling all those pipes off. You don't have to do that, but what we're trying to do is not lose loads of coolant, have a gush everywhere. Just to show you how this it fits when it's actually installed, you've got that little hole there for the clip that goes onto that stud there. I've got a plug pipe there, but this connection here would go into there and then through the valve and through to the bottom of the engine where it goes into the water pump. So what we need to do is either plug that and plug that, or do something a little bit different, which was what I've done. The problem with, this one here is not so bad because this is the return from the heater core, so the coolant doesn't actually come out of here that fast, but this one up here, it really does flow out of quite rapidly because it's right at the base of the engine. You've got all these coolant pipes that go into this section and it really flows out quite rapidly. But because we've got this valve here, we can use that to stop that flow. The problem is though, with the bellows in place, these are, when they're not activated, it means it's open. So if I did that, that would close it off. Now they don't close completely, they probably stop about 99% of the flow. There'll be a little bit of a dribble, which is why I've still got this plugged off here. But it's really easy to disconnect this, take this away, and then I can manually close it, and then I don't have to disconnect this pipe. I can just rotate that around after I disconnect it from here. So this is the way I would suggest doing that. So this is going to be sitting kind of like about there with that pipe there connected to there. The first thing I'm going to do is disconnect the bellows before I even try and move the bracket. And the way I'm going to do that is, and it's really simple, you just get a little baby screwdriver and put it in there on the gap, and prior to removing the bellows, I just mark with a paint pen. It can only go on one way, but it'll just stop it being a little bit more difficult later on. But if I shove my screwdriver in there and just rotate around, it just pops that off like that really easily. Then just get it, instead of trying to pull that off, and the nice thing is that because this is the end of the bellows, this can wiggle around all over the place, which you'll see once you pull it off. But then if you just rotate that off, like that, it'll just pop straight off. And then get your you'll need probably both hands in there to do this, but then just grab hold of the bellows and just rotate it like that and tilt it off that way, and it just comes straight off. And there's the valve there. If I push it up, now that's closed. If I open like that, it would be open. If you pull this off and look down it, you can see the little disc which is inside here moving back and forth to open and close the hole that's in there. To install it is dead simple. Put it in at an angle so it sits over the top of the little knob that it's going to go over the top of. Put it in, then rotate it around, and then you just push it together and it clips into place. And once you've got the bellows like that, it's pretty simple just to disconnect the hose that goes to the solenoid. You can just wiggle that and that just comes straight off like that. You'll already have a vacuum line hose still sitting on that, as well as an electrical connector there. I would leave those alone for the moment. You'll have a big nut that sits there over that stud at the back. You can remove that, and then this can come free, and then you'll be able to remove the solenoid from here. Because when it's hard up against it, because of the wall up here, it won't let you get move the solenoid up or take the plug off. But once you get it loose a bit, there's just that spot in under there. You just push that in, and then the thing just comes off. Once I get this free and I've removed the solenoid, I want to disconnect the electrical connector. It has a barbed clip which is up there, which is going to be stuck in the back of there. You need to squeeze that together and push it out the other side so we can disconnect the plug. I'd probably just leave that's the vacuum line there, which sits about here somewhere and loops up to it. I'd probably just leave that hanging with the solenoid connected, or you can pull it off. It's a bit hard to pull this one off because there's residual vacuum still inside there, but you can get that off. And then from there, this here will be connected into there. You'll have rotated the valve around, so that's closed off. That will be stuck in there. And now what I'm going to do is disconnect. So I'm going to disconnect the clip here. And what I'm going to do is move it along, because it's going to be between those lines there, and put it about here somewhere. And if you put it in the middle, it kind of squeezes the pipe in the middle, which helps actually sort of release the connection here. And then you can just grab this and wiggle that back and forth until this comes loose. So this is when we're going to disconnect this connection here from up there. So what you'll need is, like I've got here, I've got a plug which is going to go in here. This is just a 19 millimeter. That's what another one looks like. 19 millimeter irrigation plug. Well, they cost peanuts from a hardware store. I've just got a piece of 19 millimeter inside diameter hose here with another one of those plugs in there. So all I'm going to do is, when I wiggle that off and pull it out, plonk that one in there. That's where most of the fluid's going to come out. You get a little bit of a dribble here because there's still going to be a little bit of fluid coming through that valve, and then I can shove that on there. And then once it's like that and it's just hanging there, I can now disconnect my clip here, right, pull that down, and this will just rotate quite happily out of the way, and that's just going to sit there like that. That bellows, you can see when it's activated, it's going to suction and pull in, and you can see it just wobbles around all over the place, which is why it's so easy just to remove the knob that goes into the hole there. If you want to test that, you can just put your finger on that, put your finger over the end and just release, and it should hold quite happily and not release. Take your finger off, out she comes. These clips that hold on the coolant pipes, to get those loose, I just use a pair of multi-grips. These are just big, long ones here that work really, really well. And the interesting thing about them is that if you squeeze them in a little bit, clearly you can move them around and then they'll just spring back to nice and small. But if you really clamp them together, you can see there's a little knob there. That'll actually clip in there and hold it open, so you can move it around as required, which is very convenient. And then to release those, once you get them into place, you can just get a screwdriver through the hole like that and lever, and it just clips them down. If it's not in exactly the right position, pretty easy then just to get your little vice grips or pliers, whatever you're using, just to loosen that and then just move that as required. So I've disconnected the clip there as well as the two down in the tunnel, so this is a lot looser. I have disconnected the bellows from the valve here and pushed the arm on the valve up, so this is going to be closed. I've removed that clip there, put it in there. I've removed that clip and just put it down there. Electrical connector, as well as the little barb clip I've disconnected from the back of the bracket. And I've also removed the solenoid there. I've just let it dangling like that. And now that gives you a fair bit of room to move around. And now what I can do is just pull that out. I'll have my little plunger here ready to go in here. There might be a little bit of a dribble out of this one. But what I'm going to do is first pull it out, put my thumb or a finger over the top of that, and then just quickly put that in there. So that's not going to move. And now I can rotate this thing around. Rotate that around there like that. There'll be a little bit of a dribble out of there. So now I'm just going to plug that. And now everything is out of the way. So once you've got the coolant pipe removed from here, the next thing we have to do is remove the cover. The pump itself sits inside here, and we need to get this off. The screws that hold it on, there are two 25mm E10 Torx that sit up the top here, and the one at the bottom here is 40mm, but they're all E10 Torx fittings. The problem I have is that my E10 is a 3/8 fitting, not a 1/4, so it was definitely not going to fit down inside these holes. However, if you have an 8mm or even better, a 5/16 socket, they fit over there just like it's made for it. So that's what I would suggest using. To get access to these, the bottom one here is pretty simple. You can easily just get on a little connector like that and like that, and you can get in there pretty simply to get those off. The one up here is not so bad either. The wall of the car sits about there and sort of curves away like that. So actually it sort of hits things as you come in, but this one here isn't so bad. You'll just have to try your car and see what actually works. But for this one here, I could actually get that in there, but this one definitely wasn't going to go in. So all I did was take that and then just feed it down in there, filled it over the top of the socket, then just get a 1/4 inch spanner, sit that over the top. All of these have 13 Newton meters on it, so there's a fair bit of pressure just on a little spanner like that. But then if you have, because that's a 1/4 inch ring spanner, or combination spanner, then I can use my little 1/4 inch wrench and I can actually just put that on there like that. And I can use that to lever that off as well, and also to help put it on later on. And once you get that loose, you can just pull all this off, and then this should just feed out by hand. And if there's so little room, I even had to get to about there, pull that off, and then just put that down like that with it sitting about there and rotate that around to get it eventually out. But it's definitely doable. And then once it's like that, it'll actually rotate around like that underneath the pump to come out. So when installed in the car, this is how the cover is going to look. That bottom long screw screws through that bottom hole there, and the other two are separate. And bringing that off, it just rotates around and out of the car. For installation of these, like I said before, 13 Newton meters, you could get a torque wrench onto the bottom one here. The top ones here, you might not be able to, or you're definitely not going to be able to get one on this, depending on you've got some amazingly skinny torque wrench. But this is the way I did it, which works perfectly well. I just use my trusty luggage scales, and I use a measurement, and this thing here that I've got is 20 centimeters from there to there. So on install, I can fit that in there like that, put my wrench over the top, and now this is a big long lever arm which is well below the level of the pump, etc. So I can put that all the way down here. I would also suggest removing the cover over the thermostat. It has 2 screws on it. There's a third one I think on the right hand side here that will remain in place and still hold the thermostat in place. But remove those, and that's just going to give you a little bit more room. They take 13 Newton meters on install. I'm not sure how much you can see up here, but this is the high pressure fuel pump. There are 2 pipes. The low pressure pipe is at the bottom, the high pressure at the top. The bottom low pressure pipe is a 17 millimeter, top is 14 millimeter. To get those off, you just have to get an open spanner and get onto those. They were actually pretty easy to get off. And then you'll have 2 screws. The bottom one here has already come out because that was where the bottom screw for the cover came from. Now there's going to be one on the right hand side in between the 2 pipes, and there's one up the top here. It's going to be impossible for me to show, but you just look around there and you'll be able to find that up the top. They're exactly the same E10 torques that will take 13 Newton meters on install. Once you remove those, the whole thing just pulls straight out. What's really interesting is when you release those, because they've got the dry lubricant on them, even though they've got 20 Newton meters on them, they just come off so easily, and then you should be able to easily move those off by hand all the way to the end. At the start, before we did anything, we should have removed the fuel pump fuse. It's B5 on the left hand side, started the car, let the thing stop so there's no fuel pressure in there. However, if there is residual fuel pressure in there, if you just release the bottom connection just slightly, then it will just release under pressure the excess fuel and it'll just dribble down underneath the car. It's not such a big deal. And there is your high pressure fuel pump. Here's a bit of a look at the high pressure fuel pump. That's the underside there. We would have disconnected that plug there prior to removing anything. low pressure connection, the high pressure output. Screw connections are the one in between there, the one at the top here, and the one there. This one here doesn't actually get one. This one has the cover go over the top of it. We've got the solenoid here, and this is the little pressure thing for the oil system that exists inside there. On the other side, we can see the bit that keys into the end of the camshaft. You can see there's a knob on one end. So when you remove the old one, mark it with a pen like I've done there, and then put the new impeller in the same position prior to install, so it goes in there correctly. Because they also talk about replacing this O-ring. You can make a judgment on whether or not you think that's going to be required or not. Just advocate making sure that that is well lubricated, just with some engine oil prior to putting that in there. If you need to replace this O-ring, it is a 56mm inside diameter by 2.5mm cross section. Just in case you get confused with all the screws that come off, because they're a little bit different size. There are two that are 20mm long. They are for the thermostat cover. And you've got the 4 25mm and the 1 40mm that go on the cover, and also for the pump. So there are two for the pump, two for the cover up the top, and that one down the bottom there, which is the long screw. Installation of the pump once it's in there, getting torque onto the screws that connect it to the head is pretty simple, but getting the correct torque on these things I found to be pretty difficult, especially as soon as the engine wasn't lowered. Prior to installation on your new pump, you need to spray it with a dry lubricant. There's one, and I'll put something on the video just to show you what it's actually called. I can't remember the name of it offhand, but it's a water-based dry lubricant, which I think is Teflon based, so polytetrafluoroethylene, PTFE. And this stuff that they put on there is horrendously expensive. You need to buy it in a bucket load, which is a bit crazy, but you can buy spray, which they use for bike chains and that sort of thing. So the idea is you spray it on there and you let it dry, and then it puts a fine layer of Teflon over the whole thing, and then that allows everything to thread on really easily. It includes, they talk about the inside cone of the pump itself, and the reason they do that, from my understanding, is twofold. Firstly, so it goes on more easily and you get a truer torque when you torque the thing up, but also to stop fretting, which is corrosion, where you get two surfaces that don't move relative to each other, but through vibration like that, you end up with this corrosion between the surfaces. And clearly this is going to be a component, because it's connected to the engine and the camshaft, which is going to get that sort of vibration. And my understanding is that is why that is there. So make sure you do that. The bits that are already in the car should have that on there. You can put some more on there if you want, but from what I've seen, each time I've taken this on and off, it feels exactly the same. And it feels significantly easier to wind stuff on and off compared to a normal thread, because that stuff is on there. But certainly on the new one, you want to put that on there. And then when you put the fittings on, after you have connected the screws, they should just go on by hand all the way to home, easily by hand, without any tools required. And then you'll need to torque them. And this is one of the things I found quite hard. You can try and use crow's foot fittings and that sort of thing, but they have to be quite a specific shape to be able to fit in here. And then you've got the hard coolant pipe down the bottom here, which just gets in the way, and there's nothing you can do about that. So for me, what I did is, on the bottom one, I just used my 17mm spanner, and I could get it up at a bit of an angle like that. And I used my luggage scales again. This is 20 centimeters long, and both screw fittings need 20 Newton meters. So 20 Newton meters, 20 newtons at 1 meter, which is 2 kilograms at 1 meter. So that's 10 kilograms at 10 centimeters. So it's pretty simple just to put that in place like that. Apply 10 kilograms down the bottom, and that was all good. The top one though was harder. So I ended up using a crow's foot thing like this. This takes a 3/8, but there's just not enough, so I had to step that down to a 1/4. That fit over there like that, and then from there I put my thing over the top, and the thing is that hard pipe sits about where my finger is there. So what I could do was I could adjust the angle of that so it actually avoided it, and you'll just have to see what works for you. But then that enabled me, and you don't have to move it very far to put 20 Newton meters onto it. It's only a bit of a tweak like that, but that was the thing, because that, again, coincidentally enough, is 20 centimeters long. So that 10 kilograms at the end down here applied that 20 Newton meters, and that seemed to work out perfectly okay. Not sure how much of this you can see, but I've got my crow's foot on the high pressure connection there. With those 2 spanners connected to it, and I'm just going to put my luggage scales through there and put 10 kilograms on it like that. So I've just lowered the engine about 25 mils as per the workshop manual. What does it buy you? You can definitely get up here more easily. Access to the top screws of the cover is easy. You can get a torque wrench onto those. Interestingly, to tighten the 2 union joints where the pipes join, those high pressure and low pressure lines up in here, this is the crow's foot that I've got. This is for the small one, the 14. And unfortunately, it needs to be about that long. So the pivot point would actually need to be about here, where your torque wrench would come down there, because it needs to come out far enough to get around the thermostat housing and down in between here, this side of that coolant pipe. Without a tool like that, it's going to make it pretty difficult to get a torque wrench on it, because everything just gets bunched up in here and you just can't get the torque wrench onto it. So if you've got a fitting like that for each of those 2, the 17 and the 14, then go right ahead and use that. However, what I used before worked perfectly okay, albeit a little bit more fiddly.